Reading Bernard Levin's excellent piece, In Praise of Exuberance, I became concerned anew, as he has, about the general disappearance of exuberance and enthusiasm in the modern world. It reminded me again of the powerful cartoon I saw some years back by the European artist Fernando Cron. In the first panel, he shows a group of small school children entering a street-level subway station. They wear the facial expressions of zombies. Their faces display dullness, tedium, and a complete lack of interest or enthusiasm. There is no caption on the drawing, nor is one needed. The question screams out, what happened to these people in the years since childhood that has removed every vestige of their zest for life? In a world filled with wonder and the opportunity for growth and exploration of options, these adults, so representative of big city crowds and small-town people, too have apparently lost every vestige of interest. They are in neutral, in a kind of modern limbo we might characterize as survival. What happened? Is it a matter of responsibility? A factor of competition for survival? There's no easy answer, that's for sure. To tell someone he or she should be more enthusiastic is meaningless unless, at the same time, stimulating triggers of enthusiasm are brought into the picture. The saddest days of our lives are those days in which we can find nothing to be enthusiastic about. I think you can say that a person's enthusiasm is in direct proportion to the importance of what it is he's looking forward to. Thus, there are all sorts of degrees of enthusiasm. People tend to be mildly enthusiastic on Friday simply because it's the last day of the week and they've got a free weekend coming up. People tend to be more enthusiastic about going home after work at night than they are about leaving for work in the morning. But the most fortunate people on earth are those who live most of their lives in a state of energizing enthusiasm. And do you know what the key to enthusiasm is? Well, there are two keys, really. One comes from learning. The other comes from accomplishment. Learning new things tends to keep our enthusiasm high. Perhaps this explains the natural enthusiasm of the children depicted in Cron's cartoon. They're naturally enthusiastic, 14, and they're naturally happy. The reason adults tend to lose a lot of their enthusiasm for living is that they usually stop learning. As soon as school's over, they take the position, consciously or unconsciously, that they know enough. Any learning they do from that point on, they do passively through the natural passage of time and experience, or again, passively through the media, newspapers, radio, or television. If new learning comes to them, it does so largely through no effort, or at least minimal effort on their part. Learning little that is new or interesting, their lives become repetitious and settle down into well-worn grooves. They see the same people and go through the same motions every day. And gradually or quickly, all or most of their enthusiasm fades from their lives. The second key usually ties in with the first, the second key being accomplishment. It's really hard to accomplish something new without first learning something new, even if the accomplishment is limited to improving one's golf game or making furniture in the basement. But we're enthusiastic when we're working on a project we want to complete or master. The key word there is want. It has to be something we want very much to do, as opposed to those duties and projects we must do whether we like them or not. Did you ever get a good look at a dog's face when he's chasing a rabbit? It's the happiest, most alert expression you'll ever see in your life. He's got something wonderfully worthwhile to do, and he's having the time of his life trying to do it. You'd hardly know it was the same dog you saw snouncing and twitching on the back porch before the rabbit came into the picture. He couldn't even keep his eyes open then. It's the same with 15PEOPLE. The rabbit may be different for each of us, but it's our job to flush it out. Perhaps the difference is a matter of positioning. Enthusiastic people seem to be on top of life, in control of things, and have a multitude of interests. They are people who tend to be committed to something in which they find enjoyment and challenge and the satisfaction of achievement. If you sit in a cafe and watch the passing crowd outside, you will see this clear-eyed oasis from time to time. There's a quickness to the step and a brightness in the eyes. If this man or woman were present in that crowd of adults Fernando Cron depicted, he or she would be instantly recognizable. There's energy in such a person, direction, intentionality, and delight. As for the rest, the dull-eyed, the slack-faced plodders, the survivors, we might say they seem to be in a defensive mode vis-a-vis this business of living. They react to events, they don't cause them. They're like the fighter who has given up any hope of winning and who simply concentrates on defending himself from more injury. The enthusiastic people are on top of life, regardless of their status. The others are on the bottom, and perhaps those on the bottom don't know about getting on top. The word enthusiasm comes from the Greek word entheos, which means the God within. And the happiest, most interesting people are those who have found the secret of maintaining their enthusiasm, that God within. Our idea of reality. Let me quote something found in Carl Sandburg's account of the Kansas sodbuster. Who was that early sodbuster in Kansas? He leaned at the gatepost and studied the horizon and figured out what corn might do next year, and tried to calculate why God ever made the grasshopper, and why 2 days of hot winds smothered the life out of the stand of wheat, and why there was such a spread between what he got for grain and the price quoted in Chicago and New York. As he was contemplating these notions, a newcomer drove up in a covered wagon. "What kind of folks live around here?" he asked. "Well, stranger," said the sodbuster. "What kind of folks was there in the country you come from?" "Well, there was mostly a low-down, lying, thieving, gossiping, backbiting lot of people." After a few seconds of reflection, the sodbuster replied, "Well, I guess stranger. That's about the kind of folks you'll find around here." And the stranger had just about blended into the dusty gray cottonwoods, becoming a clump on the horizon, when another newcomer drove up. "What kind of folks live around here?" the stranger asked. And again the sodbuster replied, "Well, stranger, what kind of folks was there in the country you come from?" The friendly stranger said with a smile, "Well, there was mostly a decent, hard-working, law-abiding, friendly lot of people." The second wagon moved off and blended with the dusty gray cottonwoods on the horizon, while the early sodbuster leaned at his gatepost and tried to figure out why 2 days of hot winds smothered the life out of a nice stand of wheat. Noel McGinnis tells us that what Carl Sandburg means here is that the world cooperates with us by conforming to our expectations of it. Classic example of this, of course, is the paranoid person who suspects that everyone's against him and who, therefore, relates to people in such a way that they're bound to be against him. Psychologists have demonstrated that our idea of reality is determined by our perception of things, the way our senses interpret things rather than the way things really are. Edward T. Hall has written that the relationship between man and the cultural dimension is one in which both man and his environment participate in molding each other. Man is now in the position of actually creating the total world in which he lives. In creating this world, he is actually determining what kind of an organism he'll be. Carl Sandburg, Dorothy Lee, Benjamin Lee Whorf, Edward Hall, and numerous others have told us in essence that we create our own space. Now, what does this mean? Well, as with Albert Einstein, it means that space is relative. Unlike Newtonian physicists, Einstein did not conceive of space as an absolute entity in relation to which things were organized. Quite the contrary. He defines space as the relationship that exists among things as a result of their organization. Well, the tendency for reality to be a self-fulfilling prophecy rather than an absolute given has been explained by some modern anthropologists. Dorothy Lee does a good job of it in Freedom and Culture. And what all this means for you and me is that our individual worlds will respond to us in the way in which we see them. They will become for us what we expect of them. We are the creators of our own surroundings. Have you ever thought much about newness? You know, it's the quality people talk about when they say, "A new broom sweeps clean," or "turn over a new leaf." Well, newness, like most things, has its good side and its bad, depending on how we look at it. A person in a new job, for instance, may feel he's at a disadvantage. He may be nervous, uncertain of just what he's supposed to do and just how to do it. Sometimes he's bewildered by all that's going on around him. Maybe he's even a little scared. Even so, the person who's new to a business has a unique advantage over some of the other, more seasoned women or men in the company. His job has a sparkle about it. There's a luster, a challenge in a new job that isn't always present. Do you remember your first day at work? I do. I can remember the first time I sat down in front of a microphone as though it were yesterday, instead of a good many years ago. Even though it was a radio station so small they used an old walk-in refrigerator for a studio. To me, it was one of the most exciting days of my life. I was scared and nervous, and I sounded like a man with his neck caught in a car door. But I was thrilled, too. How about your job? Does it still hold the excitement it did that first day? It should and it can. But does it? One of the most common mistakes we make is to let the luster fade from our lives. As it does, we gradually lose our enthusiasm. And if we're not careful, we'll settle down into a worn, tired groove of boring habits. We become like oxen yoked to a mill, going around in circles with our eyes fixed only on the worn path of our feet. People who allow themselves to get in a rut usually don't realize that a rut is little more than a grave with both ends knocked out. Now, how can we stay out of this deadly rut? How can we keep our enthusiasm and maintain the luster in our lives instead of allowing it to fade with time and familiarity? The answer lies in reminding ourselves of things we already know but sometimes tend to forget. A Chicago executive once told me how he maintained the luster in his job, how he charged his batteries during the early days of his career. Whenever over-familiarity with his product and service or the negativity of some of his prospects or associates began to undermine his enthusiasm for what he was selling, he'd simply make a service call on one of his best customers. There, he could reassure himself of the excellent results being realized through the use of his company's products. Then my friend would head out again with renewed confidence in himself, in his ability to be of service, and in the benefits he could deliver to every new prospect. You see, even though the everyday details of our work may seem old hat to us, we should remember that those we serve look forward eagerly to the product or service. A person may be indifferent about many things, but the things he spends his money on aren't among them. We shouldn't be indifferent either, and we won't be. If we look at our product or service through the eyes of a happy customer, people are on stage every day, like the actors in a Broadway play. They're sometimes required to say the same words and go through the same basic actions day after day and week after week. The professional actor learns his lines and movements and then performs the part every day, often twice a day, for as long as the play will run. He can never allow himself to become bored with the role any more than we can afford to become bored with our work. The actor knows his audience is a new one for every performance. What he is doing isn't boring to them. What does the actor do to maintain enthusiasm, to keep excitement in his acting? He studies and works. He continues to improve his role. He lives his part, constantly refining his timing and movements, forever finding ways to put even greater meaning into the words he must say. All of us are in the people business. Each day we have the opportunity to learn firsthand one of life's most valuable lessons: how to get along well with people, how to make friends with those with whom we work, and how to persuade them to make decisions that will benefit both them and ourselves. Our success in most any type of activity will always be in exact ratio to our ability to influence people. And the best way I know to influence people is to care enough, to know enough, to serve them well. Sometimes we lose sight of the value of our work, and when we do, we lose the luster, not just from our work, but from our lives. So here are some more luster-restoring ideas you can use right now and every day from now on. 1. Understand that anything, no matter how exciting in the beginning, will grow, not may grow, but will grow, stale in time if we're not careful. 2. Keep in mind that fighting off staleness in our lives is a daily job. There's something you must do every day in order to keep vitality in your performance. It is simply the actor's technique: live the part. 3. Realize that there's no such thing as a job without a future. Every job has a future, just as every person has. Whether or not that future is great or small depends entirely upon the person holding it. 4. See the big picture. See your work in relation to the whole scheme of things. Your work is important to those you serve. Your success will depend on how well you provide that service. 5. Finally, keep developing your ability to see yourself and your work through the eyes of that most important person, the recipient. And remember, don't ever lose the luster. When we use a euphemism, we use a word that is perhaps less expressive or direct, but often less distasteful or less offensive than another. When we say a person has passed away instead of saying he has died, we are speaking euphemistically. In that particular case, it's less than ideal. But euphemisms, properly used, can change one's entire outlook on a situation. My old friend, Parky Parkinson, reminded me that by changing the word problem to project, we can change our attitude toward the situation. The great Arctic explorer, Roald Amundsen, said that he and his men could never have gotten through the situations they faced if they had not given them euphemistic names. These euphemisms took some of the strangeness, the hazard, the challenge, even the terror out of their experiences. A problem might seem ominous or threatening, but if we call it a project instead, our approach to it changes. We view it as something that has a solution we are engaged in finding. In the same way, we can remind ourselves that our opportunities are often in exact proportion to our problems. Polio was a problem worldwide, but to Dr. Jonas Salk and his fellow researchers, it was a project on which they were working and which they were successful in solving. Cancer is a problem to millions worldwide, but it's a project to thousands of hardworking people in the sciences, and it will be overcome. When we have a pressing problem, and who is without one for long, I think we need to take this intelligent attitude toward it. This is not a Pollyanna attitude, unless you want to call all the people who have been solving human problems for centuries Pollyannas. It is, rather, a very human, intelligent attitude. Following an operation one time, I had to go back to my surgeon for checkups, which involved a very painful re-examination of the work he'd done. At first, I would holler and curse and tell him it hurt like you know what, but he would just smile benignly and say, "No, that's stimulating, is still hurt." Thinking of it as stimulating did something to make the situation a bit less serious and painful, and we could laugh about it. What might seem like a forthcoming problem might be termed an adventure. Instead, thinking of the move to a strange community and a new job as an adventure could change one's attitude toward it. And it's our attitude toward something that, more than anything else, will determine its successful outcome. So try changing the words you use for situations normally thought of as bad or threatening or painful to euphemisms, which can give you a more positive outlook. Think of them as projects or adventures and go tearing into them, looking for solutions. It's all a matter of semantics and attitude. Problems are a necessary and an unending part of living. Our job is to solve them for as long as we can, and solve them we do. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Subscribe for Chapter 2.